Hi, everybody. Hello. Welcome. I have some coffee for those in person. Hi, everybody online and everyone in person. I'm Graham Cornwell. I know most of you really well. I am Assistant Dean for Research here at the Elliott School. And welcome to the 2021 Elliott School Faculty Research Celebration. As you may recall, we used to hold this event in the spring. But I felt that with the return to campus, we needed to do three things. And one was to welcome everybody back to campus and specifically kind of back to our research and our scholarly community as a school. Two was to celebrate really 2 years of faculty research achievements. And three, of course, to honor our most recent Michael Brown Research Prize Award winner, Dr. Hope Harrison. I do want to make a quick note. I noticed he's online, but in our lengthy spell away from campus, and you may recall from the email celebrating his achievement, Charlie Glazer won the 2020 Michael Brown Prize Research Award, so we should applaud him virtually in person. And I just want to say a few things before I hand it over to Dean Ayers and to Hope. I've been so impressed and really awed by faculty research accomplishments over the past 18 months. Your creativity and agility in navigating everything from restrictions to spending, restrictions on travel, bringing speakers in, going to conferences, hosting conferences. I'm so grateful for your patience during the research reorganization of the university. We've really, you've had a lot of it. I'm very grateful for that. Over the past year, Diane Sang in particular has done just incredible work keeping our book launch series alive and running in conjunction and collaboration with all our institute staff. And I really appreciate that. Thanks too to Robin Kahn, Olivia Burke, who despite a lot of staffing and budgetary challenges have continued to promote faculty research inside the school, outside the school, online, through our annual report. And then obviously through our events, especially with the move to hybrid. It's been great to have them. And then always thanks to Peter Rohlberg for his support of our faculty and your research. And finally, I'm also really grateful for the passionate research support of our dean, Alyssa Ayers, quite a prolific scholar herself, who has taken really a remarkable interest in faculty work across disciplines and regional specialties. You may have noticed if you've tuned into any of our book launch series, sort of very thoughtful commentary about our faculty work is really wonderful. And it's wonderful to have such a great champion of research and scholarship as our dean. And with that, I'm very happy to hand it over to you. Welcome.
Diane's going to fix a couple things here. We know we're getting a little bit of echo. We're going to close out the recording. Okay, we should be all squared away on our tech. There's still some glitches every once in a while as we try to make the hybrid system work, but we're better at it than we were a couple months ago. So there's that to account for. Let me echo Graham's welcome to everyone. We're so happy to be able to hold this celebration in person as well as open it up to online. We're thrilled to be able to have the 2021 celebration of faculty research excellence. I wanted to note that despite the difficult circumstances we found ourselves in last year with all university travel and in-person events canceled, the past academic year marked the largest number of research proposals ever submitted by Elliott School faculty. So that in and of itself is quite an achievement. Congratulations, everyone. I wanted to take the opportunity before we turn to Professor Harrison to recognize some of the faculty highlights of the past year in research. Under the leadership of Professor Jisoo Kim, GWIX, the GW Institute for Korean Studies, was awarded a new 5-year grant from the Academy of Korean Studies to create a range of new courses, to enhance student opportunities, expand support for faculty research, and increase public programming. GWIX is one of only 2 schools in the United States to win this prestigious award. Joe Spear's project, training foreign area officers, has continued for over 7 years. She's been deepening our partnership with the Department of Defense, and it will no doubt create new opportunities down the road. Deepa Olapalli won a Smith Richardson Foundation grant to study big power competition in the Indian Ocean. This is an issue that I take some interest in and definitely look forward to reading the results of her research. So congratulations to each on these achievements. Elliott School also continues to respond in real time to the most pressing global issues that we face. To give just a few examples, Marlene Laruelle received a Minerva Initiative Award in recognition of her timely research on how Russia and China have become, in her words, service providers for illiberal governments around the world. Congratulations. Ben Hopkins' new book, Ben is not with us today. Ben Hopkins' new book, Ruling the Savage Periphery, and his current work, supported by a Council on Foreign Relations Fellowship, provides an historical context to U.S. failures in Afghanistan for policy and decision makers. The impressive growth of Susan Aronson's Digital Trade Hub and Data Governance Initiative. The hub itself hosts events and provides training and evidence-based research to help stakeholders understand data governance and digital trade. Eric Schlichel and Sean Roberts both published books this year that provide new perspectives on Xinjiang and the Uyghurs. Marlene Laruelle, again, started a new illiberalism studies program. Roli Lal created a new initiative with the CCAS Religion Department, the Global Affairs and Religion Network. Nina Kelsey is working on how municipalities and subnational entities can take action and cooperate on climate change, and the list goes on. So our work here matters to our students, to our colleagues, to the GW community, and to the policy and decision makers who ultimately can use our research findings to inform and guide foreign policy, national security, and international economic policy decisions. The work that we do is supported by the school and the university at every level. So thank you and kudos to all of our staff who support these projects within our institutes and our programs, in finance, in our public affairs and HR departments. We've shown a collective commitment to improving the world through our scholarship and teaching. This year, our faculty were widely recognized externally and by the university for their scholarship. Congratulations to the following members of our faculty. To Jennifer Brinkerhoff, Professor of Public Administration and International Affairs. She was the winner of the ISA, the International Studies Association, Ethnicity, Nationalism, and Migration Studies Distinguished Scholar Award. It's a tremendous honor. To Professor Charlie Glazer, who won the award we're about to talk to last year. This past year, he is Professor of Political Science and International Affairs and co-director of the Institute for Security and Conflict Studies. This past year, he received the 2021 William and Catherine Estes Award from the National Academy of Sciences, a national award that honors empirical research achievements in social sciences related to the risks of nuclear war. Celeste Arrington, our Korea Foundation Associate Professor of Political Science and International Affairs, was the winner of George Washington University's Office of the Vice Provost for Research Early Career Scholar Award. Professor Martha Finnemore, University Professor of Political Science and International Affairs, won the OVPR Distinguished Scholar Award. Professor Chris Cahill, Professor of Chemistry and International Affairs, was winner of the OVPR Research Mentorship Award. Our faculty are recognized for their scholarship, and equally important to our mission, educating the next generation of leaders, several of our faculty were also recognized for excellence in teaching and pedagogy as well. So congratulations to Shira Robinson, Associate Professor of History and International Affairs, who won the Trachtenberg Prize for Teaching Excellence. To Matthew Kerwin, Professorial Lecturer of International Affairs, winner of the Morton A. Bender Teaching Award. And to Mike Mochizuki, Japan-US Relations Associate Professor of Political Science and International Affairs. He's also the director of our BA and BS in International Affairs programs. He received our own Harry Harding Award for Teaching Excellence at the Elliott School. Please join me in recognizing these achievements of our faculty members. So that is the build-up, bringing us to our main speaker today, Professor Hope M. Harrison, Professor of History and International Affairs. She is the recipient of this year's Michael Brown Prize for Research, honoring exceptional research achievements by an Elliott School faculty member. She joins a distinguished group of former recipients, James Foster, Henry Hale, Mark Lynch, Marlene Laruelle, and Charlie Glazer. Professor Harrison has been a faculty member of GW since 1999. She is an expert on Germany, Russia, Cold War, the Berlin Wall, and the politics and culture of memory. Her work epitomizes policy-relevant historical scholarship and offers new insights into how attitudes toward the wall and about national identity have changed across various segments of German society. Most recently, she is the author of After the Berlin Wall, Memory and the Making of the New Germany, 1989 to the Present, Cambridge University Press, 2019. And she is the author of the prize-winning Driving the Soviets Up the Wall, Soviet-East German Relations, 1953 to 1961, Princeton University Press, published in 2003. Professor Harrison served as a Council on Foreign Relations International Affairs Fellow at the White House, where she was Director for European and Eurasian Affairs on the National Security Council staff from 2000 to 2001. She's held fellowships from Fulbright, the Norwegian Nobel Institute, the American Academy in Berlin, Harvard University, and the Wilson Center. We should also note that she formerly served as Associate Dean for Research and as Director of the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies. Before inviting Professor Harrison up to the podium, I'm going to ask Graham to play a brief video clip about Professor Harrison and her work, and we will welcome her to the podium in one moment.
Being over here, and it gives all of us a new appreciation for being an American. It was a humbling experience for us too, as far as that goes. Just being 12 years old, you know. It gave a whole new perspective on the world. It kind of opened it up for us too.
Thanks for the call. Harrison.
Yeah, we who grew up in a democratic system often take it for granted. And sometimes we can see anew through the eyes of people who haven't had the privilege and the good fortune of growing up in such a system. The former president of Germany, someone who came from the East, Joachim Gauck, always speaks of the tears in his eyes when he first got to participate in free elections. The first and last East German free elections in March of 1990, where they voted for rapid unification. He wrote about the tears in his eyes. And how many Americans don't take that seriously? People in many democratic countries who don't go out and vote and exercise the rights and the privileges that we have as democratic citizens.
To Rika out of Los Angeles.
Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Professor Harrison.
Thank you so much. It's not only is it amazing to win this award, but it is so amazing to be back here in person with all of you, and especially to be in person with our new dean, Alyssa Ayers. This is just really, really wonderful. Thanks to everyone here and people who are online, who I think include my father is online and some dear friends. So I want to thank my colleagues who nominated me for this. And thanks to Graham, Diane, and Alyssa so much for organizing this event. And also, I'm so grateful to the Elliott School for, in my 21 years that I've been here, the school, each dean has been so supportive of me and my research, and that means a lot. And of course, I love the students. They keep asking really interesting questions and keep me excited. So sharing my research with them, hearing their questions contributes to more. So Isaiah Berlin, the British philosopher, would call me a hedgehog. In his 1953 essay, The Hedgehog and the Fox, he wrote, "A fox knows many things, but a hedgehog knows one thing." For me, that has been the Berlin Wall. I have been captivated for nearly 35 years by the story of Berlin being divided by a wall. And I've written 2 books about this history and many articles. A city divided. How could that happen? What was it like to live there? How have people recovered since? These are questions that I've been engaging with and have kept me going for a long time. Along the way, I've grappled with fundamental issues concerning agency, responsibility, borders, trauma, mourning, celebration, and the creation of historical narratives and founding myths. In the process, I've consulted thousands of documents in Berlin and Moscow and interviewed more than 100 people. And I've traveled along the path of the former wall, imagining it and learning about it. So I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes and then open it up in case anybody would like to discuss anything that I mentioned. I started my training as a Sovietologist at the end of the Cold War, learning Russian in the process. Then I became fascinated by Soviet policy toward Germany, and particularly the question of building the Berlin Wall. So I learned German. I wrote my dissertation, which was the basis of my first book, on the Soviet and East German decision to build the wall. As I was working on this in 1989 as a graduate student at Columbia University and reading boring secondary sources because I couldn't get to the documents, I kept having this hunch about the importance of the East German leadership in this process, that it wasn't just the Soviets, the superpower, that had been important in the decision to close the border. Well, as it happened, on the night of November 9th, 1989, I was on a plane from New York City to West Berlin, switching flights in Frankfurt on the way. To my astonishment, the pilot on the flight from Frankfurt to West Berlin got on the intercom and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, in case you haven't heard, the wall fell last night and we are flying into history." And there I was writing a dissertation about the wall. I arrived in Berlin and, of course, quickly went to the Berlin Wall that I had been studying and writing about. And I stood there as everyone was celebrating, and I wondered, well, now that the wall is down, is anybody going to care about the story of why it went up to begin with? But then the Cold War ended and the former top secret communist archives opened. And I could actually tell the story of the decision to build the wall. And this was just incredibly exciting to be one of the first historians into the archives in Moscow and in East Berlin. So I spent much of the 1990s flying back and forth between Moscow and Berlin, not always sure what language I was speaking. I would get off the plane coming from one place and still speak that language, and it would take a few hours till the other language would come out. As I sat in the archives reading so many documents, it became more and more clear to me that the East German leader Walter Ulbricht, in fact, had been quite important and not just a puppet by any means. In fact, as I was astonished to read in the documents, the Soviets resisted his efforts to close down movement between East and West Berlin and thus stop the thousands of East Germans who were fleeing to the West to escape from communism and go toward democracy and capitalism. As I read the documents, I was stunned by the tone, the way in which this East German leader spoke to the Soviet leader. I was stunned by his persistent and confident, almost bullying of the Soviet leaders. He was not cowed by them. This is not the picture of a satellite that so many people in the United States and around the world assumed was the reality behind the Iron Curtain. The East German leader became adept at turning the weakness of his regime and his proximity to the border with West Germany and NATO into strength, into bargaining power in his relations with the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. As an aside, in the midst of turning my dissertation into a book, as Alyssa mentioned, I was working at the White House at the National Security Council. So I had this frame in mind of a superpower and small, strategically important country being able to have bargaining power. And I watched as the country of Georgia again and again pushed the U.S., asking for more aid, financial aid, military aid, next to the big Russian bear. And I thought, there I was thinking, what am I going to offer the White House? I had been a little nervous about that jump from being a professor to actually being a policymaker. But as I watched the dynamics going on, I thought, this is familiar. I know something about this. Back to Berlin and the East German and Soviet leaders. The East German leader, Walter Ulbricht, did not give up. And this allowed me to create some personal pictures of the two leaders. I'm a very social person, as my students and colleagues know. And so I liked having a chance in this first book to write a bit personally, to create sort of mini biographies of what these two leaders were really like, something that I would do much more in my second book. It was while I was speaking here for my job talk at GW in the late 90s that one of my colleagues in the history department, Ed Berkowitz, after listening to my talk about the importance of the East German leader and how persistent he was, he said, "Hope, I've got the title for your book, Driving the Soviets Up the Wall." I said, "Ed, that's perfect." And luckily, Princeton took it. The publisher doesn't always agree on a kind of a cute title like that. But they agreed. And so that was the first book. This book was in the field of diplomatic history and international Cold War history. Relying on documents, it told a story particularly about leaders. Although obviously along the way, the actions of the millions of East Germans fleeing communism were crucially important. So for my second book, this book, After the Berlin Wall, Memory and the Making of the New Germany, which looks back over the last 30 years since the fall of the wall, I realized that I wasn't done with the Berlin Wall. I was still fascinated by it, but from a different angle. In the process of writing the first book, I had, of course, spent a lot of time in Berlin as it was coming together after the toppling of the wall and the unification of the city and the country. I was there in the archives when suddenly the police arrived looking for documents that showed the involvement of the leaders in the orders to shoot people trying to escape. And I'm thinking, just ask me, which they didn't. But, I'd been in there for nearly 8 months at that point. So the archives were closed for a while the state prosecutors who were bringing to trial the East German political and military leaders and the border soldiers who had actually shot people. The archives remained closed for a while, and I waited till they reopened. But I watched what was happening in the city, what was happening where the wall used to be, how they made a bike and walking trail, how they had some memorials. And I became very interested in this process of how Germany, which is so well known for grappling with the Nazi past, looking at how were they dealing with this much more contemporary past, but a longer period of time, the 40, 45 years of communism in Germany. And with this, this was related to my growing interest in countries around the world who grapple with difficult aspects of their past. Now, the US, as we all know, has done this in fits and starts. And we're in the midst now of a pretty intense, if polarizing, reckoning with history in this country and with slavery, racism, and monuments. But for quite a while, I've been fascinated by this topic in countries around the world. And I decided to focus on Germany again and the wall and deal with these big questions. What do you remember? When do you remember it? How do you decide to remember a difficult past? And where do you do that? And what really guided me in the second book, who gets to decide what is remembered, particularly in public places and at public ceremonies? Now, when I started this project, many Germans I spoke to, particularly Germans from the West, would say to me, "Why are you doing that? Why aren't you focusing on the Nazi past?" And I said, because many people have done that. That is incredibly important. But I'm interested in another past, the communist past. And looking at how people killed at the wall have been commemorated, what happened with the trials, how do Germans understand the rise and fall of the wall, what are the narratives that get told? What are the stories that political leaders tell on the main anniversaries of the rise and fall of the wall? So for this, over all too many years, again, I conducted research in archives and carried out many interviews, over 100 interviews with people in Berlin, mostly Berlin, with people connected with the public memory of the wall, people who have played a role in how the wall is remembered in public places. And I've ultimately highlighted several of those people that I call memory activists. And there were, I'll just say a couple of sentences about three of those people. One of them was a Protestant minister, Manfred Fischer, whose church stood in the Berlin Wall death strip, and in fact had then been blown up by the East Germans. But his parish house, where they continued having services, was on the West Berlin side of the wall. And when the wall fell, he insisted some of this must be preserved as a memorial to people who were killed at the wall. The wall was across the street from his parish house. He literally stood in front of bulldozers to stop them from removing that piece of the wall. I had many conversations with him. Another person, Rainer Klemke, who worked for the Berlin Senate, and who had family on both sides of the wall. And throughout the Cold War, he kept driving with his van packed full of things to bring to his relatives in the East. Whether that be clothes, whether that be sometimes wedding rings, as he told me, records, all sorts of different things. He ended up being the key official in the Berlin Senate who pushed through devoting 40 million euros beginning in 2006 to preserve parts of the wall and remember that history. And finally, an East German, Tom Zello, who had been a dissident in the communist East German regime and in United Germany, felt that not enough people understood the role that East Germans had played in bringing down the wall in 1989, in creating what has become known now as the peaceful revolution. So these are some of the things that I have been focused on. It has been very exciting doing this research, having the time to be in Berlin, but also to come back here and think about it and write and discuss things with my students. The Berlin Wall, there are pieces of it here in Washington. It's also part of US history. A lot of people feel that the fall of the wall had something to do with US policy and US victory in the Cold War. So you saw, media cares about this on the big anniversaries. And that led to a really wonderful opportunity with great courses, partnering with Audible, the audiobooks section of Amazon. They commissioned me during the pandemic. It was really nice to have something positive happen during the pandemic. They commissioned me to create a 9-lecture course on the Berlin Wall for the general public, which we recorded in their studio this summer and which will be released this fall. So I'm very excited about that. And I'll just end mentioning the next project I have in mind, which is related to the Berlin Wall. You will not be surprised to know, but it's not about the wall itself. When the East German government sealed off the border in Berlin in 1961, they also fortified East Germany's border in the north at the Baltic Sea. These days, when people think about refugees crossing water, they think of the Mediterranean. Well, during the Cold War, there were people who risked their lives to cross the Baltic Sea, a lot colder than the Mediterranean. Some of them made it to the west, to Denmark or to West Germany. Others didn't. I've talked to many people who lived on the Baltic coast in East Germany and what that was like. So I've already begun reading and talking to people about this. This will be the next project, but I'm just so excited to have this opportunity to talk to you all about sort of what's fired me up in my research. And thank you so much for coming. Happy if anybody has any questions in the room or online, I'm happy to address those. Thank you.
Great. Testing out all of our tech slides here. I'm logged in here so I can see things in the chat. If people want questions in the chat, got mics now, so everybody else should be online through the speakers. And if this doesn't work, we'll try to figure it out.
All right, can you hear me?
Everybody hear us? Let's,
Says no.
yeah, somebody says no.
Can't hear me?
Okay, we're
Yes,
good?
we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Well, let me kick things off. First of all, give us a sense of what it was like to make that transition from working early on archival documents to thinking about memory. They're kind of different practices.
They are definitely different practices and different fields, by the way. I mean, sort of diplomatic history versus the field of memory studies. That's one of the things I love so much about being a professor and having this chance to research is you can completely change your field almost. Okay, yes, the Berlin Wall is similar, but it's very exciting to be able to dive into a new topic, a whole new set of literature, new group of scholars. I certainly used archives, some archives for the second book, but it was a much broader group of sources, and so that was fun to talk to people, to look at exhibits, to look at monuments, to read speeches that leaders gave on these big anniversaries of the rise and fall of the wall, to be there in person, which I was for many of the major anniversaries, and just to watch and sort of feel the atmosphere, read the newspapers at the time. So it was wonderful to have this very different kind of research experience with a much broader range of sources. And of course, I wasn't at the mercy anymore of the Russian archivists, because in Moscow, in the archives where I worked, there are no finding aids. You don't type in, I want this document and that document. You try to establish somehow a trusting relationship with an archivist and hope that A, they understand what you want, and B, that they give you what you want. So I was happy to have that taken out of the equation.
Can you share a little bit about some visual representation?
Absolutely. Well, there, I don't know, Peter, my colleague who comes from Germany, he apologies to you. He may, disagree with me, but for many Germans, there's a seriousness about memory that means that you shouldn't be emotional about it. So there have been big debates in Berlin about how much a memorial can pull on your heartstrings versus should be very formal. So the occasion for that was the 15th anniversary of the fall of the wall, when I, thank goodness, was in Berlin for a month. And Alexander Hildebrandt at Checkpoint Charlie, the most famous crossing point in the Berlin Wall, this woman who owns a museum right nearby, put up over 1,000 wooden crosses with pictures of victims, their names, and the date of birth and date of death and cause, like, drowned after being shot while trying to escape. Now, many people were very moved by that. Others felt it was too over the top, that somehow memory should be more restrained. So there was a big debate, even on sort of the aesthetics of how do you do this. Now, ultimately, the idea of putting faces and names to the people who died at the wall prevailed. And at the official National Berlin Wall Memorial, there is now a big structure in the center of what was the death strip that has the pictures of the people. They have identified 140 people that scholars have identified so far who died at the wall. There are many more who died at the border between East Germany and West Germany or the Baltic Sea. But it is now a part of the national memorial to have these people's names and faces and the dates.
Questions here, live or online? Oh, yeah. We need a mic. Can everybody hear? Nick?
Yeah, because
Can everybody online hear?
We can
Can
repeat.
they hear?
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea.
Great.
Thank you. So I'm about to leave, so I wanted to ask this question. I noticed that the three people that you mentioned, that you talked to, are all on the side of the democratic side that was trying to take this out. Have you talked to actually communists, the ones who really were for the wall? Why this happened? What is their views of the wall going down?
Yes, great question. Thank you. This is something I grappled with at great length. How much voice in my book do I give to those people? Exactly. Who, communists, unrepentant communists, their voices come out particularly from the trials. I consulted extensively on the records of the trials and the things those people said, the way they defended themselves. It was the Cold War. It was the Soviets, which, given the first book I wrote about how the Soviets resisted and didn't want the wall, wanted the Eastermans to find some way to keep their people in without building a wall, that, don't blame us, it was the Soviets, didn't go over so well with me, for sure. I talked to some former border soldiers, but of course, who was willing to talk to me? The border soldiers who basically sort of feel bad for what they did and are openly grappling with it. So how I handled the voices of others was reading, and there have been some documentary films and even some feature films in Germany. So I have a whole chapter in this second book about this notion of victims and perpetrators, and it particularly focuses on the border soldiers, some of whom themselves then and since have felt like victims. Now, for someone who was paralyzed when they tried to escape and they were shot, or for family members of people who were killed when they escaped, thinking of the border soldiers as any sort of victim, it doesn't work for them. But, for 18-year-olds who were, most of the people who served at the Berlin Wall were like 18, 19, 20 years old. And yes, they had a choice. I mean, you had to serve in the military, but you didn't have to serve at the wall. You could say, if they said to you, all right, in your military service, you're going to be at the wall, you could say, can I please be somewhere else? Not everybody had the guts to say that. So I was fascinated on one of my trips to Berlin when I was at home watching TV, and up comes this documentary. And for the first time, that documentary included 6 former border soldiers who were willing to speak on camera about their experience. And this was, broadcast prime time, 8 to 10 p.m. I mean, I almost fell off the sofa, grabbed my notebook and started taking notes, listening to these guys. They're, they would say, some former border soldiers say, I was following orders. I was doing my job. This is what I was told to do. I was terrified of my commander because, if I didn't stop someone trying to escape, he would also get in trouble. So I tried to create as full a picture as I could of sort of the range of attitudes of border soldiers. So there was some.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Congratulations, Hope. Very good to see you in person again, and great news on the award. My question just follows directly on. Actually, I'm interested in peacekeepers. I'm interested in the people who are in the middle, right? Not on either side of the wall, but on the wall. And you started answering that. So, could you just tell us a little bit more about like how militarized exactly was the entire structure? How many border soldiers did it take to keep people in? Because I've seen the little news snippets of knocking the bits of the wall down and the main photographed areas, but I don't know about the entire stretch. So any information about that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. The exact numbers I have in my book. I temporarily can't pull them out of my head, but each year, I somehow 50,000 stands out in my mind, but many border soldiers, they always served in pairs. It was massively militarized. The whole border strip, there was an outer wall and an inner wall and multiple layers in between, obstacles, trip wires, and the guards armed and being told to stop unauthorized entry into the border area. So they were trained to use their Kalashnikovs. They again, on trial years later, some of them tell different stories of, I didn't have the guts to shoot, to which the judge said, well, if everybody had felt that way, we wouldn't be here. To others who said, I fired away or I fired at their feet, but others said, they were traitors. They were creating this was a criminal act, entering the border zone without permission. So there was lots of, obviously, indoctrination. They all lived in barracks together and had, regular training, military training, but also, ideological training about the enemy and defending East Germany against the enemy. So it was definitely a military structure, overseen not only by the border troops, but also by the secret police, the Stasi. And the Stasi penetrated particularly the officer corps serving at the wall, but also had informants among some of the soldiers.
Thank you so much for a very interesting topic. I mean, I came here from the Czech Republic, So for me, this is really interesting. I'm currently a Fulbright visitor here, and so this is a great opportunity. I'll definitely read the book because for me, this is something as it's part of my early memory. I was a little kid when the Berlin Wall crumbled and the Velvet Revolution in the Czech Republic took place. So this is for me, this is really fascinating. So I wanted to and thank you for that. I wanted to inquire whether you found some specific traits that led to the crumbling of the regime and the wall as a consequence in Eastern Germany, and how it ties to the crumbling of the other regimes. Because back then, when the Berlin Wall crumbled in Eastern Germany, in Prague, the regime was still holding still, and some Czechs even thought that it will never crumble, will never fall down. Well, a couple of days later, it did, right?
Yes.
And we still have the discussion. What led to what was the ignition of the events? It was in the making, right? Since the, at least mid 1980s, there were changes in the Soviet Union that led to the towing of the regimes. But then there was the spark, the ignition that was probably needed in these satellites that set things in motion. So I was wondering whether you focused also on what was different in Eastern Germany compared to others. Whether there was some connection, particularly between Czechoslovakia and Eastern Germany, because I remember the Eastern German cars in Prague in front of the Eastern German the German embassy. You know, when the Eastern Germans were fleeing. So if you had a chance to also take a look into this and how it ties into the main topic of your book. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you and welcome. Um, uh, by the way, I mentioned how people escaped. A lot of East Germans escaped by going to other socialist countries, such as Czechoslovakia. I'm talking about before 1989. Because the Berlin Wall was such a deadly militarized, fortified border that was the hardest place to try. The inner German border had mines, which the Berlin Wall didn't, but the inner German border did. So that was also problematic. So a lot of other people went to other countries. And I was reading that apparently the airport in Prague was well known as a place where West German human smugglers could go there and get East Germans out of the airport in Prague during the Cold War. So you asked about how it all came down. I do write about that in the context of Eastern Europe, and certainly Gorbachev coming to power in 1985 was essential. Poland had begun with solidarity in 1980 and 81, this trade union that was then outlawed and people were put in prison. Poland was, right next to East Germany. There were East Germans who were inspired by the solidarity movement in Poland. Of course, they were also imprisoned for, if they demonstrated how inspired they were, like if they held the solidarity flag up, they were put in prison. But it was multiple events coming together in the late 1980s. Both your country, Czechoslovakia, and East Germany resisted Gorbachev's reforms, unlike Poland and Hungary. So Hungary opened a section of its border with Austria in the summer of 1989. That was a huge spur because a lot of East Germans then went on vacation to Hungary, but never came back, going out that way. And increasingly in the fall of 1989, more and more East Germans took to the streets or fled. I mean, there was this real division. The ones to the point where some of the demonstrators on the street said, "Wir bleiben hier," we are staying here, meaning unlike all these other people who want to get out of here because they're so frustrated that Erich Honecker, the leader of East Germany, would not reform, they went and camped out, for example, at the West German embassy in Prague, which drove the Czech government crazy because that gave Czechs ideas. Wow, you know, these people, these East Germans are obviously not happy with the communist regime. How happy am I with the Czech communist regime? And they're watching all this happening. And then the West German government negotiated with the East German government to release those people, put them on trains, those East Germans, and bring them to freedom in West Germany. So more and more pressure was building up, both from East Germans leaving and East Germans taking to the streets. And the, you know, one thing I write about in my book about the toppling of the wall, the heroic story that has become the main narrative that the German government tells about the toppling of the wall in 1989 focuses on the regular East German citizens on the streets who were demonstrating and wanted freedom of travel. And when a top East German spokesperson mistakenly announced the wall was open, people went to it, and the border guards standing there didn't have any orders, didn't know what to do. And so finally they just, you know, opened the gates and let people go. The role of those people, such as Harold Jaeger, who opened the first border crossing point at Bornholmerstrasse, you know, that's not so sexy, so exciting, so inspiring as, you know, people who were taking to the streets, who were risking being put in prison, who sometimes filled out their last will and testament beforehand and figured out what they would do with their kids if they were put in prison or they were killed, you know, signing documents with their lawyers, you know, bring my kids to my parents. I mean, really, you know, serious things. The focus is on those East Germans on the streets, and you know, they were incredibly important. But the full narrative of the wall coming down, you have to also talk about the people who peacefully opened the wall and the leaders who peacefully decided, you know, essentially not to fight this, and, you know, held roundtable talks between the government and the opposition, and ultimately, you know, had free elections in March of 1990, and then joined, you know, created unified Germany, where East Germany was absorbed into West Germany a few months later. So the role of the East German authorities, you know, is also part of it, but that's not focused on too much.
One more question, I think appropriately.
First of all, I'd like to thank Hope for the immense work that she has done on this topic. And I think it's actually significant that it's an American scholar who has actually done that. I think that the rifts, the divisions between East and West are still too deep for any of the two parts to actually do this work in this objective and even-handed and fair manner, as you have done that. And also, I want to commend you on the subtlety with which you actually approach the problems. For example, for me, this was actually a personal question. Not only are you asked, you know, in this military commission, do you want to go to the war, to the border or serve inside the country? You were asked, are you prepared to use a weapon against human beings in the protection of peace. So because the demagoguery here was that you're doing that service as a peacekeeper, right, against the fascist West German regime. Even the word wall was not supposed to be used, as you know. You couldn't say Mauer, you had to say the anti-fascist protection wall. Right? So if you used Mauer, that was their word. That you couldn't use it in East Germany. That was already kind of a verbal betrayal. I wanted to ask you about this one aspect that to me is really painful because it is an emotional issue. So you remarked about it before. For many East Germans, it's still an emotional issue, including myself. For many West Germans, it is. And I cannot talk about it without a certain movement, without a certain inner reaction to certain facts, also including outrage about people who kind of brutally lie about the past and try to kind of refashion it and reverbalize it. But who owns this past? Right? So this is one of the big questions, because frankly, what I find astonishing is that the leadership of first Free East Germany, like the year or so, and then later in the United Germany, the East Germans who actually made it, the former East Germans who made it in the political establishment, into the political establishment, they were for the most part not participating in that peaceful revolution. Right? So this includes all the people on top. They didn't go to the demonstrations, and they would actually explain why they didn't and why they couldn't, and so on and so on. But those who actually risked their rear and their social well-being, they didn't actually manage to make a career in that new United Germany. And so I'm wondering who actually is in charge of writing that history of the wall, and is there a little bit of a culture war between those who actually risked something in 1989 and those who didn't, but who then used this new freedom that was not fought for them and not by them, but by others. Do they clash in their view of the past? Because I've heard kind of very demagogical versions of the Eastern past. Well, it wasn't all that bad, and there was free healthcare, and there was free education, and free kindergarten, all of that. So what's bad about that, and things like that. And then it becomes harder and harder to prove what an inhumane regime that was. So can you say a little bit about this discourse about who owns this East German past and who owns 1989 as this year when the wall came down and when the regime came down?
Thank you, Peter. I always love hearing your comments and your questions. And by the way, as you know, I was just in Germany for the elections on this delegation, and I thought of you because we went to Halle, and I think that's the state you're from. So I was thinking of you there. First of all, your comment on an American doing this research and that so many Germans are still emotionally involved in this. In pretty much all of the 100 interviews I did, at the end of the interview, each German said that to me. It was, they all said, it's great you're doing this. It's got to be someone outside. Whether I talk to West Germans or East Germans, they all said that needs to be someone outside. Who owns the past? That's exactly very much the core of my second book. Your point about the elite and how representative is obviously Angela Merkel herself was not part of, and she has openly said, she grew up in East Germany and she was not out there on the streets at all, and she has said that. Some people you and I both know, Gunther and Maria Nuka, are in the category, I would say, of people who did risk a lot to go out onto the street and who are in the elite. For years he was a member of the Bundestag. You know, he was a cabinet member, you know, I mean, he was appointed by Merkel to be the German representative to Africa. Maria Noka, I mean, they are among the people who, you know, as they've written about, you know, signed these documents, you know, in case, you know, while they were out demonstrating, the Stasi came in and took their kids. She is now in charge in the state of Brandenburg, which is the state that surrounds Berlin, with the topic of grappling with this part of East Germany's past. So, you know, believe it or not, unlike this country, you know, there is a federal official who has a job of actually funding and supporting all sorts of initiatives to deal with the past, and that there is that job at each state as well. So the Germans, you know, on this issue of openly grappling with the past, you know, they are just so far ahead of us, I think. So I will end it there.
Gathering and reception are coffee and cookies. We have coffee and cookies. Trying to make the in-person experience as nice as possible. Thank you, Hope, really, for bringing us not only on scholarship, but how history changes geography. What it means to think of itself as an object. This scholarship, congratulations. Leading Hope again.